I'd like to now bring up Yasmin Brown, who put this program together. She's on our chapter executive committee, and she's an MIT alum, so she knew who to call. But I'm very happy that Yasmin stepped up and said, I would like to put this program together. I think I know a great speaker at MIT, and she hit it out of the ballpark on this one. So Yasmin.
Well, when Dr. Hansen said that our speaker was a rock star, he really meant that, and I agree. About 2 years ago, I was on campus, and I was thinking about, let's see what some MIT professors that I can get to know a little better and bring them to Houston for our MIT Club of South Texas. And I got a chance to meet Professor Don Sadoway about 2 years ago and heard him speak on energy storage. And what I liked about him most was not only was he very professional and very savvy in terms of his area of expertise, but he spoke in a way that you could really understand what he was talking about. You know, MIT sometimes has this sort of a geek mentality, right? And he was very understandable. Not only that, he was had a sense of humor, sort of a wiry sense of humor that really appealed to me quite a bit. So I'm very, very pleased to have all of you here to hear a dynamic speaker. I want to just focus on a few things because some of you asked me about him. So let me just focus on a few things about his resume. He's a John F. Elliott Professor of Materials Chemistry in the Department of Materials Science and Engineering at MIT. He has joined the faculty of MIT in 1978. He's authored over 150 scientific papers, and he holds 19 U.S. patents. What I like about him most, he not only mentors undergraduates and graduate students, but also students that are working on their doctoral thesis, plus the plethora of research that he does. So please join me in welcoming our rock star, Professor Donald Sadoway.
Okay, well, thank you for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here. It's been very snowy in Boston this year. Even though I was born and raised in Canada, so it doesn't bother me. But in Canada, they know how to sweep the snow away. In Boston, they can't do that anymore because of their crumbling infrastructure. So, yeah. Anyway, so let me grab my. This is going to be a little bit awkward because I'm used to moving around, but I'm potted here because of this.
Do you want a portable mic?
Yeah, if you had it, because I'll go all over the place. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is innovation in stationary energy storage. And so there's two paths here. One is the stationary storage piece, but the other is the metaphor for innovation, because I think that's something that has a broad applicability, whether you care about batteries or not. I think one of the things that people find interesting at MIT is the, yeah, number nine, yeah, it works. So, does that work? It's a little bit softer, yeah? Well, I'm gonna, all right. So, yeah, so there's gonna be the two parts. So, I was gonna start with, well, it looks like the thing got moved. Oh, right. See, what's an engineer? I'm an engineer. I can just touch it and I just fix it. If I were a theoretician, I'd probably write a script or something. It'd be a waste of time. But so what is an engineer? Because I know there's some MIT alums here. Well, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, an engineer is one who contrives, designs, or invents. The invention piece is really critical to engineering. This is the first written reference to engineer. It's from 1325. That's Old English, but I bet you can figure it out. A tower full strong that quaintly engineers made. Quaint used to mean very nice execution, and then in the 1800s it became sort of diminutive. engineer and ingenious both have the same root. So here's a clear comparison. A scientist discovers that which exists. An engineer creates that which never was. And I'm not disparaging scientists. I think, you know, there are clear demarcations, and science for science sake is really important, and I respect all that. But it really troubles me when I'm in the School of Engineering that some schools of engineering have the metrics of the School of Science. You know, it really distresses me to go into a faculty meeting and have people talking about citations and Hirsch factors and so on, because that, you know, just because you're quoted a lot doesn't mean you're doing great work. It means you're running with the pack. If you're ahead of the pack, no one knows what you're doing. You know, but they assume that if you're not getting quoted, it means that your work isn't any good. But they're afraid. Now this one I got from a scientist. A scientist converts money into ideas, but an engineer converts ideas into money. That's the difference. Dana Bookbinder I met at Corning last year. So the money thing is an important piece because the subtitle of this really should be cost-based discovery, because when it comes to invention at the university, because of the metrics, you know, the publication and all that kind of stuff, people are really driven to invent the coolest chemistry. And then they just assume that it's going to get into the manufacturing environment and the costs will come down. But I'm here to tell you that doesn't work in energy, because the scale is so large. And you know, it's not like the smartphone. The smartphone had no impediments because it was a new functionality. It had no resistance. So, you know, I don't consider that, you know, such a triumph. I mean, it's fantastic that we have it, but it was just when it came, it was self-authored. It was easy. But if you're trying to innovate in energy, you've got entrenched, heavily subsidized, existing supply chains, and they're going to fight. It's not a case of where they say, wow, you know, I used to be a phonograph company, and now there's audio tape, and now there's CDs, and now there's this other stuff. Well, that's my phone ringing. I'm sorry, I shut that thing off. Unplanned. Unplanned. Yeah, that's like the Churchill line. Somebody goes to number 10 Downing Street and knocks at the door, and his daughter comes down, and he says, I'd like to see the Prime Minister. And she says, I'm sorry, he can't come to the door right now. He's upstairs preparing one of his impromptu speeches. So that was an impromptu thing. But if you're going to innovate in energy, you're going to have to do something that is cost competitive. That's the only way you're going to displace existing energy, because the existing players are going to fight to keep their territory, and the public doesn't want to pay a penny more. They'll pay $300 a month for all of their smartphone services and cable. But if you suggest that maybe their electric bill might go up $10 a month to change the nature of the generation, they'll howl. They won't go. They've done sensitivity analyses, and they found that the breaking point is about $10 a month. They might pay $5, but 10, no. They say no. So that says to me that I'm not going to whine about it. I'm just going to say, all right, just got to be smarter. Got to invent cheap. And by the way, electricity. So why did I work on this? Why did I choose to work in this field? So I could have done anything, I suppose. Growing up in Canada, I didn't know limits. You know, I had boundless optimism. And so why I got into this was because it's so central to everything that we consider modern. You know, all the IT people here, you don't have electricity, you got nothing. You're out of business. And, you know, you're tethered in the wireless age. When I walk through an airport, I just laugh. I see all these people panic. They're looking for power outlets, and they're like, you know, little dogs, you know. You know, because, you know, and you can blame the battery. No, it's not the battery. It's the dependency on these electrical devices. So we got to do something about it. But then, on top of it, you know, somebody mentioned MOOCs and so on. You know, when you look at this image, what you see is that there are parts of this that are dark. And some of them are dark because nobody lives there. But some of them are dark because they haven't been electrified. Actually, you know, I can wander off the script here because I remember I'm in Texas. And so I remember reading Robert Caro's biography of Lyndon Johnson. And in Lyndon Johnson's early days when he was a legislator, that he fought for electrification, and parts of Texas were among the last to be electrified. And there's this chapter in that book about what happens when they, you know, and the early attempts to electrify were bungled, and there was actually a lot of resistance to electrification. But then finally they get it through, and all of a sudden people just, they didn't anticipate that you could read after dark. You could read. That means education. What's education is the antidote to poverty. And by the way, you know, you mentioned water. I mean, if you don't have access to electricity, you can't use many of the solutions. So you go to MIT, you go to a Media Lab, places like that, you see all this fantastic stuff going on. I just take one look at it and I just laugh. I say, you don't have electricity, you're dead. So the number one obstacle to progress is electricity. If you electrify, you know, 2 out of 7 people on the planet don't have electricity. Once they have electricity, they get access to purification of water. Once you get purification of water, now you can feed yourself. You don't have to spend your whole day wondering if you're going to be able to get to tomorrow without being diseased. And now you can feed yourself. Now you can on and on and on. So that's the ticket. The ticket is electricity. Electrochemistry is the key to world peace. That's why I work on it. Because with an invention here, I can topple dictators half a globe away. By the way, you know this is a collage, right? Most people look at this and they go, the world at night. No, it's not. You know, because when it's light over here, it's dark over here. If the world ever looks like this, we're in big trouble. You are, not me, because I got to figure it out. So now so I made the case about so electricity is so important. So why don't we have storage? Why aren't we spending money? Where's all the research dollars been going? Well, I can give you a whole treatise on how we've been misspending our research dollars. But let me tell you about storage as an enabler. And it's not just for renewables, it's for today. It's for today's grid. Today's grid is designed for peak load. And we hit peak load about 1% of time. If you and I started an airline that for 360 days a year, 40% of our planes were on the ground, and then the other 5 days, they're all up there because they're ready for peak demand. You'd say that's a stupid business model. I'd say that's called the grid. If we designed our highways this way, what's one of your interstates here? I don't know any of the numbers. 10? Imagine 10 is 25 lanes wide in each direction. Why? 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 So that anybody can get on that highway at any time and never have to hit the brakes. Okay, fine, fine. You know, it'll work, you can pay for it. the estimate is that to electrify the world, it's going to take $17 trillion over the next 20 years. And if we're designing that with a 40% excess that's just sitting there, that's $7 trillion is being wasted going to education, going to healthcare, and so on. So we're wasting a boatload of money. So you might say, well, that's outrageous. Why don't we do something about it? You know why? Because the way the grid is run is if they screw up and they've got to build another power plant, you can't just add another 1 or 2%. You got to add, so many gigawatts. Guess what happens? The costs get passed on to you, the ratepayer. So the system is self-perpetuating. It's a rotten, stupid system, and that's it. Furthermore, it's fragmented. If I were an oil company, I can explore, drill, pump, ship, refine, and sell to the public. But in electricity, the guys who generate don't transmit. The guys who transmit don't sell to the ratepayers. So I come along with a storage solution, and where can it do the most good? Well, first question is, where's the market? Who can make money from this? And if they can't, they don't just say, we're indifferent. They say, keep that thing away from me. So that's the problem we're up against. It's a tough one. So it just means you just got to get smarter. You got to outsmart them. And then, of course, as renewables become greater percentage, renewables are fine when they're down around 2–3% of total generated power. But they're not a solution. You know why? Because they're intermittent. And intermittent power is useless. In fact, it's worse than useless. It's harmful. In fact, there's the concept of dirty wind. Dirty wind. Is that me again? This is an Apple product, so you know it's a piece of junk. If GM built a product like that, they'd all be in jail today. It's unbelievable, the stuff that they put out. Like this. This thing here, it's got the video output here and the audio output on this side. I mean, who's the brains behind that? How many Apple engineers does it take to make a computer? That's stupid. Unbelievable. So let me tell you how the grid works, because most people don't know how the grid works. It's not like water, all right? If you want to take a shower, you just go and you turn the water on because you got a reservoir, all right? But the electricity that's powering these lights was generated moments ago. And if all of a sudden people turn off their lights, we have to turn down the generation capacity. Supply must be in balance with demand at all times. You can tolerate a little bit of mismatch, but not much. If you get a lot of mismatch, first thing that happens is the frequency starts to migrate. And you're betting that you got 60 hertz coming out of that socket, and it's 60 plus or minus 0.1%. And one of the things they have, if you go to places like Afghanistan and Iraq where our troops are, it's not that the power is intermittent. It's when it's on, it's dirty power. So it might be, in that part of the world should be 50 hertz, but it might be 48, it might be 52. Can you imagine if every time you had to plug something in, you didn't know if you were going to blow the motor? So what happens if all of a sudden the wind comes into the grid? Because, of course, we have laws that require that if it's renewable, it has to get first priority. So it comes in. And now I'm the ISO. So I got to call up a nuke plant or a gas plant or a coal-fired plant and say, ramp down, I need to drop by 5%. Okay, so they're going to start dropping down by 5%, but it's going to take maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Meanwhile, this wind stuff is just gushing into the grid. And then all of a sudden, the wind stops blowing. Now I call them up and I say, I need another 5%. That's the dirty wind, because when you drive your car, you get the best fuel economy and the fewest emissions if you get up to highway speed and hold it there. and you get the worst fuel economy, and you generate the most emissions per unit distance driven in stop-and-go traffic. Well, that's what this does. It makes stop-and-go traffic. And unless you can contribute a base load, this is stupid. But I'm not against it. I'm saying renewables without storage is incomplete. Unless you can deal with their intermittency, it's just a headache. People think, oh, if the sun is shining, we'll add some, like top it up or something. But you can't. That's the way it is. So I've made the case that storage would be kind of cool to have, and this is installed capacity as a function of capital cost. And this is a log plot here. So what that means is that all of this is essentially nothing. It's less than 0.1%. The only thing that works is pumped hydro, and that's geographically constrained because you have to have a difference in elevation. You have to have lots of water. So you're not going to put pumped hydro in the middle of Houston. You're going to put pumped hydro in the middle of Boston. And even if you had today, you'd have trouble getting permitted anyways. So all these, what this graph tells me is that pumped hydro works and all the batteries don't, and you better get down below $500 a kilowatt hour capital cost or it's not going to make any difference. So again, it's cost driven. And it's not battery versus batteries, battery versus combustion. It's a lot cheaper to go buy a diesel genset or a natural gas peaking unit. So if I'm going to take them on, I got to think differently. And today's lithium-ion batteries fail badly. So it's a 20-year-old technology and it's way too costly for this market. So what's my approach? I got two planks here. First, confine chemistry to earth-abundant elements. This is what I mean to cost-based discovery, not cost-based engineering. Cost-based engineering goes without saying. I'm saying cost-based discovery. Earth-abundant elements. So this is a graph from a government publication. And it's also logarithmic. And so you see earth abundance is a function of atomic number, which is kind of interesting. Why would you connect the dots? This is lithium, this is beryllium. What does it mean to have an atomic number of 3.4? There's no such thing. This is stupid. But, so, you know, I'm always amused when people say, let's connect the dots. I'm saying, you know, sometimes you shouldn't be connecting the dots. These are discrete values. There is nothing between lithium and beryllium. But they connected the dots. The other thing to take away here, these elements are abundant, these aren't, and the difference is about 1 billion. 1 billion. And so when I'm dealing with grid level storage, I refuse to allow my people to work in this part of the periodic table. You're wasting your time because it won't scale. This is why you will not see fuel cell vehicles, because they have platinum in them, and platinum is down here. And this is why I don't understand why GE works on cadmium telluride solar cells. I don't care what the efficiency is. It won't scale. There isn't enough tellurium in the Earth's crust to cover anything of description. So why are people working on this? It's okay if they want to work on it in science. It's fine. But it's not going to scale. You give me this in the periodic table, I can tell you the future. Right? If you want to make it dirt cheap, you make it out of dirt. And preferably local dirt. It doesn't make sense to trade your dependence on imported petroleum for dependence on imported neodymium. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing. So all those wind turbines have magnets in them. The magnets have neodymium, and the neodymium comes from China. So, and how much steel goes into one of those, and doo-dah, doo-dah. And the second thing is it has to be easy to manufacture. This is where lithium ion falls down. If you go to a lithium ion battery plant, you've heard about the gigafactory. It's gigafactory because it's going to cost gigadollars. $5 billion. $5 billion? You know what I could build for $5 billion? I could build a greenfield integrated steelworks that would produce 2 million tons of steel a year. And when was the last time an integrated steelworks was built in the United States? 1961. Bethlehem Steel in Baltimore. But we're going to build a $5 billion battery to build yesterday's batteries tomorrow. Good luck. So that's the background for the discovery of the liquid metal battery. So I started thinking about this about 10 years ago. And I'd been working and still do work on metal production by electrochemical means. And so I decided, first of all, disregard everything you know about batteries, because that's not going to take you anywhere. Because the batteries are all designed for these applications, and that won't work on the grid. People who think you can start with nanotechnology and scale it to grid level, I don't see it. I don't see it at that at all. I see the path forward is to look big for big, not small up to big. Let me show you what I mean. So I looked at the economy of scale of an aluminum smelter. I'm not saying aluminum smelter, I'm saying aluminum smelter. Because this is Charles Martin Hall's patent from 1889. It's aluminum. That's the original name. It was even in the United States. I think somewhere around World War I, we started calling it aluminum. But the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry has declared that it will be aluminum. So that's what it is. Yeah, see? Look at aluminum. It wasn't a typo. It's everywhere. And this is the Heroult patent from France. So why am I drawing on this for inspiration? You take bauxite from one corner of the globe, carbon, that's petroleum coke, 6.5 kilowatt hours of electricity per pound, and the plant probably costs you $5,000 an annual ton. And you go from dirt to metal for less than 50 cents a pound. And that's an economic miracle. And this thing is an energy hog. It drinks huge amounts of electricity. I looked at that and I said, can I teach that thing how to store electricity and give it back? Because if I can, it's going to be cheap. It's going to be really cheap. There's a modern aluminum smelter. This is about 50 feet across, probably goes back about a mile. It was invented in 1886 simultaneously by Charles Martin Hall in the United States and Paul Heroult in France. There they are. Heroult on the left and Hall on the right. They were both born in the same year. They both died in the same year. And they met once, 1911, when Hall was given the Perkins Medal by the American Chemical Society, and Heroult came from France and spoke in praise. They were fierce competitors. Their patents crossed at the World Court, crossed license and so on. But they respected each other. They admired each other. It's not like, you know, like the cat fights that go on today in some of the sciences where people are tearing their hair out and sabotaging each other's data and so on. Well, anyways, to go back to the story, they were both born in the same year. They must have been the same age in 1886. How old were they? 22. Two 22-year-olds changed the world. This is the Washington Monument, 1884. It was started in 1876 by a group of citizens who wanted to commemorate the centennial of the United States. And the idea was to cap it with a precious metal. This is 100-ounce pyramid of aluminum, which was a metal that cost more than silver at the time. But then along came Hall and Heroult, and with this, they dropped the price of aluminum down to that of a common structural metal. Why? Because aluminum is the third most abundant element in the Earth's crust. If they had invented this process for platinum, it wouldn't have made any difference. And by the way, all of your mobile devices have silicon in them. And it's really our good fortune that Mother Nature declared silicon to be the semiconductor of preeminence, because silicon is the second most abundant element in the Earth's crust. If our semiconductors were made of rhodium, none of you would have a cell phone in your pocket because it would be too expensive. And it wouldn't be scalable. Even if GE wanted to, they couldn't get them to you because it doesn't exist. And by the way, you know what's coming next? Since you asked me about the future. Fiber optics. Why? Because silicon is the most second most abundant element in the Earth's crust, and oxygen is the most abundant element. So silicate fibers are going to come because they're going to be abundant and cheap, and they can dig them up in the backyard anywhere on the planet. So this is 1884, but you know, now you have what's tantamount to a beer can on top of the Washington Monument. That's pretty cool. So I looked at this cell and I said, maybe the aluminum industry is sitting right on the solution. They just didn't do their homework or something. So why is an aluminum cell not a battery? This is the cell. You got an anode at the top, a cathode at the bottom. You put aluminum oxide in here and you pass current, you make aluminum at the bottom, you make carbon dioxide at the top. And it's the fugitive emission of the carbon dioxide that makes this thing impossible to run in reverse. So I thought about it and thought about it, and eventually figured out that I could make a battery out of this if I could make liquid metals at both electrodes. Then I'd be able to pool it up and have it on reserve. So where am I going to get the metals from? Well, I'm a professor and I was teaching big freshman chemistry class, so I always go to the periodic table. And the periodic table was enunciated by a professor, that's Mendeleev. He was 35 when he enunciated this. And interesting story about him. He was the youngest of 13 children, born poor in Siberia, and ended up in St. Petersburg. And then he was traveling as a professor, and he traveled by train. He'd sit on his trunk in a train station, and he'd play cards. He'd play solitaire. So, they call it patience in the old country, but it's solitaire. And he was very interested in the elements, and so he had in his breast pocket file cards, and each file card had the properties of a different element on it. So he'd have, lithium and its mass, and sodium and its mass, and so on. And he kept thinking and thinking, how to make this into a system. And so this is my theory, because I'd read that he played solitaire. So my theory is that he's playing solitaire and he's got the clubs. He puts the ace of clubs and the king of clubs, and then up comes the 10 of clubs. He says, I can't play the 10 because I'm missing the jack and the queen. And then he looks here and he goes, I've got aluminum, I've got silicon, I've got zinc, and I've got tin. And he just had them in order of atomic mass, and all of a sudden the lights come on. He says, tin belongs under silicon, and there's some missing elements here. And okay, so there were some other people who were thinking that, and he says, I'm going to predict that there's an element here. He called it eka silicon. Eka is Sanskrit for second. So he said, I'm going to predict, and he took the average of the atomic masses of this and said it's going to be 72, and it's going to have tetravalent chlorides and so on. And sure enough, germanium's got an atomic mass of 72.61. So it was the recognition of the missing piece and the prediction, the quantitatively verifiable prediction. So that's how that started. That's Mendeleev. So I'm looking at this periodic table saying, I didn't do any quantitative. I didn't use a supercomputer or density functional theory. I stood back here because I'm an outsider from outside. Because I was a metallurgist from Canada. I was teaching freshman chemistry. The chemistry department hated me because what was he doing? He's got no right to be teaching a freshman chemistry class. Now, MIT fortunately has porous boundaries, and so I was allowed to do that. But I had to put myself in the mind of a first-time learner, 18-year-old, otherwise very smart, and through teaching that freshman chemistry class, that's informed my ability to invent. I'm not inventing great stuff because I took all these advanced graduate classes. No, you retreat to the fundamentals. So anyway, I'm teaching all these freshmen, and I go back to my office. I'm thinking, how am I going to invent this battery? And I think, well, I need a big electronegativity difference. So these are the most electropositive metals. So I'm going to take something from the northwest part of the periodic table. And these are the most electronegative metals. These are even more electronegative, but they're nonmetals. If I use one of these, I'm going to make gas. I want to make both. So this is the weakest metal, and that's the strongest metal. This is the staircase. See the red staircase? That's the semi-metals. So I just a little bit metallic from there. It was that simple. So this was it, the liquid metal battery. So magnesium on the top, antimony on the bottom, and a molten salt in between. And magnesium, liquid magnesium is less dense. It's got a density less than 2. This is density greater than 6. Is density about 4. Magnesium's insoluble in salt. Salt's insoluble in antimony, so they phase separate like salad oil and vinegar. So there's no membranes, no separators, no nothing. Easy to build. You just shovel it in, turn it on, away it goes. And then when the thing wants to discharge, because magnesium wants to alloy with antimony, but it can't. The only way it can alloy is to become magnesium ion, sends electrons through the external circuit, and then alloys. This layer gets thinner, this layer gets thicker, so I don't have any of the degradation mechanisms in a lithium-ion battery. And then to charge it, I force current through and electro-refine the magnesium back and purify the contents. So every time I charge the battery, I essentially remake the contents. And the passage of current generates heat, which on the 787 Flameliner is the cause of fires, right? So whereas this, here I capture that heat and use it to keep this thing at temperature. This is running at about 700 degrees Celsius. So it's easy to manufacture, self-assembling, and it's self-heating at commercial scale. You put proper insulation. This is schematic, of course, but I mean. But now I want you to please pay attention at this point, because people say, oh, he's running at high temperature, this thing is going to be terribly inefficient. No, my round trip efficiency is greater than is on the order of 75%, which is greater than that of pumped hydro, even allowing for the thermal losses. Round trip efficiency 75%, because pumped hydro, it's hydroelectric, but don't forget, you start with electricity, you pump water up, so that's electrical to mechanical energy, and then the water falls down, and now mechanical energy goes back to electrical energy. These are terribly inefficient systems. It's immune to thermal runaway. In a lithium-ion battery, that's why lithium-ion will not scale, because if you take a battery of this size, it's no problem. It won't overheat. Won't overheat. Rarely. Usually, if a lithium-ion battery catches fire, it was because it was malfunctioning of the charger. But it's thin, and the front face, you're the cooling fin, you know. See, right? You got it in your pocket. Zzz, yeah? Okay? But if you put a whole bunch of these together in a big aggregate, now the distance from the center to the outside is great, and now that heat will build up, and it's got a flammable, volatile electrolyte inside. If I came to you and said, I got this really cool new battery, but actually the electrolyte will burn, you'd throw me out of your office. Well, that's the lithium-ion battery. By the way, you cannot ship lithium-ion batteries by air. They come from China on a boat and then by truck or by rail. It is forbidden. Although, you mark my words, I've seen the manifest of the MH370, the Malaysia airliner. 2,400 kilograms of lithium-ion batteries were on that plane. That's the one they never found? It's the one they never found. So we've been to the Department of Transportation to ask, could we ship these by air? And they said, well, tell me, what's the threat at room temperature? Well, you got solid metal and solid salt. No problem. Send these anywhere. And cost competitive, well, we'll see. Ah, yes. Yeah. Oh, you can't hear. I don't have sound. Yeah, forget it. He's going to say the T1000, it's a polymimetic alloy. What do you mean? It's liquid metal. Yeah. So this is my team. I had a tiny amount of research funding. It was very hard to get funding. All right, so here it is. Just one student, David Bradwell. He was also from Canada. We were both born in Toronto, different years. And so Yeah, we're looking at an early prototype. He looks really worried. You know, he's worried that this thing might not work. And I didn't tell him I wasn't sure it was going to work either, but I mentored him. You know how you mentor him? I said, no, it's going to work. And then the American Chemical Society wanted to do a profile on me, and they asked me for an image, so I sent them this picture, and they refused to publish it because we weren't wearing safety glasses. And I said, it's just a staged thing. No, we will not publish an image showing people unprofessionally dressed in the laboratory. And I said, well, just take out a Sharpie and put the thing on it. And they said, no. So I had to find another image. But, so what's the thing? David was a bachelor's holder from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. He did not know electrochemistry. So he was the outsider, just as I was. So this, and I didn't look to battery experts at all. In fact, I've never had battery experts work with me because they're going to take me down the same path to the same dead end. So I'm going to tell you something, and it's even more true today than it was 37 years ago when I first came to this country. You know, 37 years ago, we still had big corporate research labs. You know, GE and Schenectady, Bell Labs, and so on. They're all gone. Bell Labs gone because of breakup of telecom. GE, Jack Welch destroyed the GE Labs in Schenectady. And so now, what do you got? You got national labs. Forget it. The innovation site is the university. And let's not forget where electrochemistry came from. It came from the University of Padua. A professor, Volta. There's the first battery right here. Silver and zinc coins with cardboard soaked in brine in between. And that gave birth to a new field, electrochemistry, and immediately spread into the market and gave us electroplating and electroforming and served the basis for electro-winning metallurgy. But Volta's discovery of the battery also demonstrated something else. For the first time, it demonstrated the utility of a professor. Before Volta, nobody imagined a professor could be of any use. But Volta showed if you let a professor do some good work and leave him alone, you can come up with new technology. So I'm telling you, when Congress becomes miserly with research funding, and some congressmen find examples, there's always going to, you know, with enough money, there's going to be some projects that get funded that can't stand up to the scrutiny of the public, all right? But believe me, you're cutting off the engine of innovation if you cut this off.
If you had studied Kamachev, you would know what I am talking about. Who's Kamachev? Who's one of my greatest scientists. He has proved beyond any question that physical attraction is purely electrochemical.
Purely electrochemical. Yes. So I didn't have any money. I just had this flimsy little grant. Thank goodness that there was a little bit of money at campus. And then with the MIT Energy Initiative, there's this whole story about how I ran into people at Total. They were interested in solar. They didn't see themselves like Kodak. Kodak saw themselves as a film company, not an image company. And they just stayed the course until they were destroyed. Total sees itself as an energy company. Today, gas, oil, but maybe tomorrow something else. And they realize solar without storage is incomplete. So I got funding there, and then I was a winner in the first round ARPA-E competition. So now, this is my team, summary. It's 20 people. And again, this is the only one that really was steeped in electrochemistry. The rest of these people were newcomers. And some grads, some undergrads, some postdocs, and multinationals. She's from Spain, from Korea, China, France, Trinidad. He's from Tahiti, French Polynesia, with a PhD in high-energy physics in Paris. She's from Poland. David and I both from Canada. He's smiling now. And I hired a few Americans. I figured I had to make sure that I showed some generosity. And this is the other point. 20 times 3 is greater than 3 times 20. These 20 people working together for 3 years worked miracles. If I had that same amount of money dribbling over 20 years, I wouldn't be standing here right now. You know, we gotta fund our research in the physical sciences like this, because we're doing this in the life sciences, but we're not doing it in the physical sciences. And believe me, as of 2013 with sequestration, we've done great harm to this infrastructure. The most powerful resource this country has is this university system. There's nothing on the planet that can rival it. Yeah, there's some good schools in the UK, and there's some good schools in Germany, whatever. But as a set, as an integrated set, you can't touch it. And you know, Disney, nobody could rebuild it. You know, when you go to campuses, you see people from all over the world coming here. Why? And they say, oh, Americans should be traveling more abroad. Yeah, they should. But boy, if you want to get an education, you get your education here. Because that's where the powerhouse is. The intellectual powerhouse is here. So don't squander it. But you can squander. It's like when I used to teach in 10250, we had these old sodium vapor lamps. When you first turned the lights on, it took about 5 minutes before they got hot enough and the light came on. But then when you went to shut them off, you shut them off instantly. I once asked the architect, why do you put they don't go on for 5 minutes? He says, well, professor never says anything important in the first 5 minutes. But it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for research, that I can kill research like that. But then if all of a sudden somebody calls me up and says, I've got $13 million for you, I'm not going to get that group of 20. It will take years to craft that. So this is some of the images. This is I call this the shot glass. It's 1 watt-hour, 2 centimeters. It's just steel. This is rusty. It's not glam tech. I had a hard time getting students 10 years ago because everybody wanted to work in nano, in bio, in IT. And I'd say batteries, and they go, I'm looking at them. Everything you're working on is powered by electricity. But anyway, I'm patient, very patient. The hockey puck, everybody knows hockey puck is 3 inches in diameter, so that's the 20 watt-hour. And then the saucer. So we were also looking at scalability, 1 to 20 to 200. So there's a section of one of the cells. This is magnesium on the top, salt and antimony. So their phase separate and so on. And when they're small, it balls up. Some of you are old enough to remember playing with mercury when you were young. The mercury balls up. So does this. But in large amounts, it's flat. How do I know? Because all the window glass is made by pouring borosilicate glass on top of molten tin. And it is absolutely flat. And this is Jocelyn, one of my students. She was one of my American students. And that's Steve Chu, who was the Secretary of Energy. He came to see us in June of 2012. That's Sal behind. I'm sorry that he just got... Sal, interesting guy, California, son of migrant farm workers, first generation to go to college. Graduated top of his class in physics at Berkeley after going to a community college because he couldn't get into school. And Steve Chu autographed our glove box, and I made sure we wore glasses for the picture. So I can show this in mixed company. So where are we? We've tested over 1,000 cells. We're looking at different chemistries, different alloys, different salts. We have a number of these that are below $100 a kilowatt hour for the electrodes and the electrolyte. And this isn't Edisonian. When someone says Edisonian to me, that says that's empirical thrashing. That's a negative to me. Edison was a mean SOB who abused his people and just worked really, really hard. But there was no thought. Sorry to burst your bubble. So this is not Edisonian. And you know, I don't care. I have tenure means never having to say you're sorry. So I don't care. I don't care about publishing, but I have to publish in order to launch the careers of the young people who work with me. And I'm really proud that this past fall, one of our chemistries was published in Nature. Nature is the preeminent journal. Science is okay, it's kind of nice, but Nature is it. Nature is the gateway to the Nobel Prize. It's not for me, but I'm saying that's the thing. This isn't nature science or nature chemistry or nature communications. This is nature. This is the testimony to my team. They're fantastic. And they wanted an image. So Felice Frankel, who is a published photographer, made this image for me. And so obviously we couldn't make an image of our cell. It's operating at 450 degrees Celsius. So you can see at the top here, this is it's square-walled cuvette. And so for the bottom metal, we used mercury. You can see the meniscus on each side. And for the electrolyte, we used an aqueous solution. And the top is ferronickel. That is the current collector for the upper metal. And you can see that the electrolyte has an upper meniscus, whereas the liquid metal has. It's just really cool. It's nice. It's beautiful. You know? But this is the thing that really makes this thing hum. Never mind that its capital cost is competitively low. This, you know, I told you, I said when you recharge the battery, you rebuild the constituents. Am I right? These are fade rates. This was a cell that was operated at 600 milliamps per square centimeter. That's about 50 times the current density in a lithium-ion battery. And it's 100% depth of discharge. That means full charge to full discharge. So there's no game playing. This isn't like a Prius. Prius goes between 60 and 40. This is 100 to 0, the most severe stress test you can give. So the fade rate is 0.0002% per cycle. What does that mean? It means if I were to cycle this thing once a day, every day for 10 years, I'd retain over 99% of its nameplate capacity. There's no battery technology that can do that. By the way, the typical metric is, how long does it take before you drop to 80%? Answer, 305 years, which ought to take care of pretty much everybody in this room. Okay? Now that's different. So David and I and Luis Ortiz decided it's a long way from the lab bench to the market, and there's a whole bunch of other ancillary things like power management systems, inverters, all that other stuff. So we have to do that off campus. So we started a company, and all the cool names were taken, so we called it the Liquid Metal Battery Corporation. So I can't get worse than that. Someone would see me at a party, so what are you working on? Batteries. Oh, I hear you have a startup, Liquid Metal Battery Corporation. I'd clear a room, you know. But then we changed the name to Ambry because it was easy to pronounce. It was a 5-letter domain name that was still available. And how did I choose it? Because I invented the battery in Cambridge. Well, that's how we got the name. So my first funding came from Bill Gates. Everything's unusual here. So I'm from Canada, so I'm very polite. So I wouldn't dare approach Bill Gates. He came to me. I'm like Forrest Gump. I just sit in my office and wait for things to happen. So why did he come to me? It's a really great story. I'm teaching this big freshman class, and back in 2004, MIT puts my lectures online in OpenCourseWare. Forget the MOOCs. MOOCs is recent stuff. This is going back. All he did was just video me and put the lectures up online. Because the class was too big to hold all the students, so they would digitize it and put it on, and then people could watch it asynchronously. And so Bill started watching these, evidently. I got an email around 7, 8 years ago from some guy who had been at the annual Microsoft big powwow they have, and Bill gave his address. And in the middle of this address, he starts saying, you know, you really should watch these chemistry lectures. So this guy wrote me and said, well, you should feel honored. Bill Gates is watching your chemistry lectures. And I said, all right, fine. I filed that away. so now it's August of 2009, and I get an email from a woman who says she's his secretary. Says that he's coming to Boston in September, would like to meet me, but I have 90 minutes. So I ignored the email. Because I thought the students had hacked into my email. I said, this is crazy. So I just didn't do anything. And then she wrote me again, said, perhaps you didn't see my email, but Mr. Gates would really like to see you. And so I said, well, maybe this is real. So anyways, yeah, he came. We sat in my office for 90 minutes. We talked about open courseware, distance learning, engineering education. Then we migrated over to batteries. I told him about liquid metal batteries. This is 2009. This is before the big funding. We had nothing. David's early experiments were unsuccessful. We were still learning. And but Bill understood the concept. He says, you know, if you ever decide to spin out a company, let me know. I'd be willing to put some money into it. So a year later, we went to see him, and he was our first investor. And then Total put money in to match his. So Total put one placement on campus and a different placement in the company. And then subsequently, Vinod saw my TED Talk and pulled me aside. And then there's a whole story how we met Michael Vlock, who's married to Karen Pritzker. I don't know if you know Karen Pritzker, but maybe you've heard of the Hyatt Hotels. That's the Pritzker family. So these people are, you know, they're doing unusual things. So it's quite an unusual group.
Who's Michael Vlock?
That's Karen Pritzker's husband.
Oh.
And I give a talk in Bern, Switzerland, and this Swiss insurance company wanted to put some money in. And so we've also opened a manufacturing facility in Marlborough, Massachusetts. This is November 2013. That's Phil Giudice, who is our CEO. He was Undersecretary of Energy for 4 years under then Governor Deval Patrick. And that's David. He's smiling. This woman here is the commander of the Joint Base Cape Cod, where we're going to have our first installation in about a year's time. And so what was that all about? Well, this is what it's about. We hired somebody who had worked at Ford, not to build cars, but to build the robots that build the cars. And through his knowledge of the supply chain in Michigan, we've designed and built and commissioned this device that robotically builds our cells. Grabs a can, puts in the metal, puts in the salt, TIG welds the top, and so on. $10 million capital investment, 130 megawatt hours a year. And all this is the, you know, the ancillary stuff. And then, you know, I talk to people like, I saw everybody. I saw GE, I saw Schneider Electric, ABB, Siemens, all these people. And they all saw me, and I said, look, why don't you help me? There's all this other engineering to be done. I'm an electrochemist, but that's not a turnkey operation for a customer. Nobody would help. Nobody would help. So we hired our own people. That's what we've been doing in the company. So this is an animation that shows you, these are 4-inch square cells now. So this is what we have to do at the company. So that's 700 watt hours. That's a 12-pack, the size of a case of beer. And then you put these together, there's 2 kilowatt hours. And then put those together. So that's 25 kilowatt hours. That'll handle more than a home. It's about size of a large refrigerator. 1 meter by 1 meter by 2 meters. 25 kilowatt hours. 25 kilowatt hours over 4 hours. So 100 kilowatts. And now if you put 2 rows of 10 of those, that'll give you 2 megawatt hours. And this is about the size. Now this is our power electronics, which we're working on as well. We've designed our boards, everything. Zero help. All done by ourselves. This is about the size of a 53-foot trailer on an 18-wheeler. So that's the footprint. All right? And of course, it's all about the cost. But it's silent. Gas-fired peaking unit, diesel genset, very noisy, very filthy. This is emissions-free. There's no moving parts, pumped hydro, pumped, and it's remotely controlled. So this thing can act as both a source and a sink. You know, so sometimes if the wind comes in, then the remedy for that is not a battery. The remedy for that is a load. You've got to dump it. I mean, you've had that here in Texas where they call you up and say, please turn on your machinery. We need to balance the grid. Well, this thing in 1 millisecond can take a signal and turn from a source to a load. We've run these cells at 1,000 milliamps per square centimeter, which is 30% higher than the current through an aluminum smelter, for 200 cycles. You know, 1,000 in, 1,000 out, 1,000 in, 1,000 out, and then gone back to the normal, and they're fine. You do that with lithium ion, you can do it once or twice, but then they'll decrepitate in a positive electron. And we're designing these to the price point of the electricity market, not when oil's $250 a barrel, not when $200 a ton carbon tax, or not when the subsidy. Just get it under the price point and blow the other guys away. So where are we? Well, obviously the first one's way over here because it's got all the amortization, just like the first cell phones. Remember the first VCR, the Betamax? $3,000 was its price, right? $3,000 in 1975. And by the time we did away with VCRs, they were less than $100. So we're way over here. But our cost models indicate we're going to be below 500. If we're below 500, we'll be up there. So what are the next steps? We continue to do basic research. I'm not just flogging a dead horse. It's not more and more about less and less. Yeah, there's some really good stuff. The ARPA-E research is complete, but there's a new ARPA-E FOA out, and we're hoping to get some. What do I want to do with that? This is a chemistry that one of my students is working on right now. It operates at 260 degrees Celsius. The other ones are 500. So this is a steel clamp. That's a polymer can. That's really cool. A liquid metal battery at 260 degrees. And then this is the next one. This is big. So this is charging, right? I got the magnesium down here, and I want to bring it back up. I said to the guys, push this thing hard. I want to see what happens in an overcharged condition, because that's when the lithium-ion battery fires start. They overcharge, and they put lithium on a negative electrode. So I said, overcharge this one. So you start bringing the magnesium out, goes up, and it goes into the top, and so on and so forth. It's about a 0.6 volt system. It's really, it's a very low voltage system, but we put them together and they work. It doesn't matter what the voltage is. If I give you a 5-volt system at $2,000 a kilowatt hour, you won't buy it. If I give you a 0.6 volt system at $100 a kilowatt hour, you'll buy it. So don't get drawn into the wrong metrics. But I said, keep driving this thing. What happens? At some point, the antimony starts going into solution. And when the antimony starts going into solution, this thing turns into a 1.8 volt system. The voltage goes up 3x. So for the same capital cost, I just got a 3x improvement. So this is sort of like a Zebra battery, but much, much more versatile. So I call it Zebra Unchained. Zebra was zeolite battery research, South Africa. That's where it came from. But it wasn't zeolite, it was a sodium beta alumina. But anyways, so this is a battery that's running alloying, dealloying. So that's discharge, that's charge. But when I run it in the displacement mode, it jumps up by 3x. And I get all of this energy instead of that. So that's what we're working on next. So if that thing comes into being, that's where we go. And if we get down to that number, that's below $100 a kilowatt hour. You know what that means? That's automotive. That's automotive. So if I could get to $100 a kilowatt hour with a battery that's running at about 250 degrees Celsius, I mean, that's colder than the combustion chamber of the car. So don't tell me about high temperature batteries. I mean, people say, oh, it's 450 degrees C. I said, what do you think the temperature is inside the hot water? And you let the little kids play down in the basement, right? So I'll wrap it up. So what have I learned from all this? Call them the heterodoxies. So everybody says you got to keep the temperature low for safety reasons and for energy efficiency. And I said, no. You make the temperature high, you get a higher energy density. Everybody says to scale, you build a gigafactory. You get cheaper by building many. I said, no, you get cheaper by building fewer. We make them bigger. And everybody says, human resources hire battery experts. I says, no, I hired novices. They're smart, but they're new. And they have unfettered minds. And I taught them electrochemistry to see the problem through my eyes and then turn them loose. That's the power of the university. So why do they work? It's science and service to society. That's it. It's a higher sense of purpose. Because they figured out that nano and bio are really great for career building, but this has the greatest impact. And I can't resist, I'm in Houston, so I'm reminded of President Kennedy's speech at Rice University in September 1962, where he's justifying the decision to put man on the moon. And it's a fantastic speech. I mean, what was his name? Sorensen. His speechwriter was positively brilliant. And so that, but when viewed as a metaphor, that speech is not just about space travel. It's about big technological challenges. Just make it as a metaphor. And my favorite line in that speech, this is where I'm coming to, my favorite line in that speech is, and I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, it says, we choose to work on the big problems, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. That's why these kids come to work for me, because it's a hard problem. It's not an easy problem. Because I can give you a battery that will meet all these requirements to a NASA price point, but now you've got the cost constraint, and that just changes everything. So we choose to work on the big problems, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, unwilling to postpone, and one that we intend to win. Thank you.